Hi, good morning from Netherlands and good evening in Indonesia and other parts of the world. Thank you for joining the webinar today. The webinar, my name is Hasti Tarekat. I'm the moderator of today and I'm part of the exhibitions. And the webinar series today's webinar is part of a webinar series in the conjunctions of the exhibitions of Indonesia and the Amsterdam School in Museum Schip Amsterdam that will last until 27th of August. So for those who are in Netherlands, please welcome to the exhibitions, and for those who are outside the Netherlands, at least you can enjoy the idea through the webinar series. It will be 5 webinars until June, and I think you will see on our social media about the details about all the webinars. These webinar series are organized by Museum Schip in cooperation with Heritage Hands-Ons, supported by two wonderful volunteers, Anita Halim, based in Makassar, Sulawesi, and Gadis Fitriana Putri, based in Amsterdam, and also supported by Pusat Dokumentasi Arsitektur and Yayasan Museum Arsitektur Indonesia in Jakarta, and financed by Dutch Culture in Amsterdam. Thank you for all of you who join us today and to be on time. I would like to introduce the speaker of today. The speaker of today is Melle van Maanen. He is the curator of the exhibitions Indonesia and the Amsterdam School in Museum Schip. Melle is a historian, independent researcher, and writer about colonial and post-colonial history. He also works as a program maker at the Netherlands Institute for Advanced Studies in the Humanities and the Social Sciences, or in Dutch, we call it in short, NIAS KNAW. It's a whole lot of titles for Melle, but he will share with us today a very interesting topic. I think it's about architecture and colonializations. And Melle will present himself, and also if you want to say more about yourself, please welcome Melle. And then please mute all your audio during the presentations. And for the discussions, you can share it by chat. If you have comment or questions, you can share it in the chat room, but you also can raise your hand during the discussion later. And for those who need certificates, especially students and teachers from Indonesia, you can, well, your name, if you register, your name are in our list. So please give a sign in the chat, sending your email address if you need certificates. I think that's the opening and the introductions for today, and I will give the floor to Melle. Welcome, Melle.
Thank you, Hasti, and thank you for all the introductions and all the long names. It is yeah. I am gonna start off, especially for the audiences that are not so familiar with the Amsterdam School as a architecture and design movement in the Netherlands, by showing you a video that the museum has made already earlier in 2016, when the museum had a big reopening in a larger part of the building, in the school building to be precise, where we had for the first time space to have exhibitions. We were before we were only based in the post office, which is part of the building, But now from 2016 onwards, we had a bigger exhibition space, and to introduce people with the Amsterdam School and especially the historical background of its emergence. I think it's a nice start of the whole webinar series to give everybody the same kind of background knowledge. It is though a video that is screened in the museum, and sometimes you will hear the voice saying, look at this object and look at that object. And of course, because this is in a webinar and not in the exhibition itself, we will not see those objects, but it will nevertheless give you a good feeling of the story we tell in the museum about this movement, the Amsterdam School. So I'll now turn to the video. It's about 5 minutes. Let's start with this.
A cupboard full of objects, ordinary things. A kind of bucket, an old tap, but also a beautiful stone carving and these wonderful clocks. Objects that tell a story. This magnificent building, called Het Schip, also tells a story about people who want a better life for themselves and for others, and about artists with higher aspirations. It's towards the end of the 19th century. There are increasingly more factories in the Netherlands. Workers from the countryside come to the city where they live in sometimes terrible poverty.
Volume. Er is geen volume in de webinar. Oh, shit.
The thinking behind it is that people who live in beautiful homes become beautiful people. All this construction and idealism create a breeding ground for a new sort of architecture, the Amsterdam School. These young architects want to construct buildings that are also works of art. They create a playful building style, rich with fantasy, which is also highly personal. The Amsterdam School do not have a written manifesto, but it does have the magazine Wendigo. The first issue was published in 1918. The magazine
So I'm sorry, people. Apparently the sound went off halfway. So I will play it back a little bit. So we have the sound. So stay with us, and we will continue the video again.
And this bucket is the luxury version. Because the lid can hold water, you can at least wash your hands afterwards. Cholera, tuberculosis, malaria, terrible diseases that thrive under such impoverished conditions. Poverty and a housing shortage lead to social unrest. Working people complain about unemployment and hunger. And the houses that are built are often no good. It's not unusual for them to spontaneously collapse. In politics, from left to right, there is a demand to make an end to this situation. So, in 1901, the government in The Hague adopts both the Housing Act and the Health Act. These new laws enable the government to intervene, to demolish the slums, and set standards for the new buildings. They also help the government with financing construction. Everyone who is building to provide public housing is given access to cheap loans. In Amsterdam, housing construction really gets underway when Floor Wieboud becomes Councillor of Public Housing. Together with his brother-in-law, Arie Kepler, he founds the Municipal Housing Service. They ensure...
Okay, wait. So apparently now there was no vision for a lot of people. I saw in the chat. So I'm gonna see what is going on. I'm gonna restart it again. So just a minute. Does anybody see? Can anybody see the video right now?
Yes, Melle. Yeah.
Okay. And if I play it now, does anybody have the sound?
Okay. Hopefully.
Can you imagine
Yes.
this now?
Yes.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you.
People complain about unemployment, cholera, tuberculosis, malaria, terrible diseases that thrive, a kind of bucket, an old tap, but also a beautiful stone carving and these wonderful clocks, objects that tell a story. This magnificent building, called Het Schip, also tells a story about people who want a better life for themselves and for others, and about artists with higher aspirations. It's towards the end of the 19th century. There are increasingly more factories in the Netherlands. Workers from the countryside come to the city where they live in sometimes terrible poverty. Whole families in small rooms, damp cellars or slums that hang over the canals. There is no running water, no electricity. Tens of people in one small room. This bucket stood in such a room, a bucket everyone used as a toilet. Can you imagine the smell? And this bucket is the luxury version. Because the lid can hold water, you can at least wash your hands afterwards. Cholera, tuberculosis, malaria, terrible diseases that thrive under such impoverished conditions. Poverty and a housing shortage lead to social unrest. Working people complain about unemployment and hunger. And the houses that are built are often no good. It's not unusual for them to spontaneously collapse. In politics, from left to right, there is a demand to make an end to this situation. So, in 1901, the government in The Hague adopts both the Housing Act and the Health Act. These new laws enable the government to intervene, to demolish the slums, and set standards for the new buildings. They also help the government with financing construction. Everyone who is building to provide public housing is given access to cheap loans. In Amsterdam, housing construction really gets underway when Floor Wieboud becomes Councillor of Public Housing. Together with his brother-in-law, Arie Kepler, he founds the Municipal Housing Service. They ensure both that the City Council build new homes and that housing associations are well supported. They are at the forefront of making Amsterdam a city that would be called the Mecca of public housing. There are grand plans for city expansion, neighborhoods with broad streets, lots of greenery, small courtyards, schools, bathhouses, and fewer bars. This is Councillor Wieboud's chair, where he sat at home as he read through his paperwork. And this is one of those papers, the Council Gazette, where Plan South was written out. Plan South was architect Hendrik Beurlacher's master plan for the city expansion. This is the Roelof Hartplein, part of Plan South. Wieboud and his contemporaries don't just want to build good houses, they also want them to be beautiful. Beauty, for so long the exclusive preserve of the elite, should be available to everyone. The thinking behind it is that people who live in beautiful homes become beautiful people. All this construction and idealism create a breeding ground for a new sort of architecture, the Amsterdam School. These young architects want to construct buildings that are also works of art. They create a playful building style, rich with fantasy, which is also highly personal. The Amsterdam School do not have a written manifesto, but it does have the magazine Wendingen. The first issue was published in 1918. The magazine takes the reader on an exploration in innovations and changes, not only in architecture, but also in the applied arts, music, and dance. Architects find new sources of inspiration in nature, shells, and crystals, in folk art, and in art from outside of Europe, such as these shadow puppets from the former Dutch East Indies. The architects do not limit themselves to buildings. They also design printwork, lamps, and household utensils. They make designs for the wealthy, such as these clocks, and designs for the masses, such as these mass-produced tins. And the buildings they construct are sometimes true workers' palaces, artworks for the ordinary man. Attention is paid to the smallest detail. Even the house numbers are specially designed. Many designers incorporate sculptures, such as this one by Hildo Krop. This scale model shows a home from the Dagenraad housing complex, where once there used to be a whole family living in one room. There are now 3 rooms and a kitchen. There is a toilet and running water. There is even a balcony for fresh air. The home is connected to the electric mains so that there is light to read and study by. Insert a coin into the meter and there is gas and light. a lovely house to live in, but also one where there are rules. Here in Het Schip, residents are not allowed to hang their washing outside, and carpet beating is only allowed on Fridays between 10 and 12 o'clock. And the people who come round every week to collect the rent also check that the homes are kept neat and tidy. A cupboard full of objects, ordinary things. Objects that tell a story about people who want a better life for themselves and for others, and about artists with higher aspirations.
Right. Let's do it until here, the film. Sorry for the technical hiccup. I was putting off my camera and apparently then the vision was lost. So apologies for this. I will now get back to the presentation. So this exhibition, which I've curated, I've not curated by myself. I have had a lot of advice from colleagues in the field, academics and art specialists. But also I was very much pleased to have Anita, Halim and Gadis Putri on board, who were very crucial for the last bit of the research that had to be done. In this presentation, I want to go into I would like to go into how Indonesian art, culture, and religion has shaped the aesthetic of the Amsterdam school style, and I want to do that in relation to the colonial era in which the Amsterdam school style was current, approximately between the 1910s and the 1930s. To give you a little bit of an introduction, I will first explain some more about the architect of our building where the museum is housed. He was already mentioned in the film, and he was Michel de Klerk. He was born in Amsterdam in a Jewish family in the Waterloopleinbuurt, a typical Jewish neighborhood. His father was a diamond worker, and he was raised in quite a large family, but still he had opportunities because he was a very creative individual. He had a bad concentration, but he could draw very well. And so at school he didn't perform that well, but he was a very good drawer, and we can also see that in his drawings. Michel de Klerk was discovered by Eduard Cuypers. He was an architect that maybe in Indonesia he is also better known because of his affiliated studio that was in Indonesia at the time, which was then still the Dutch East Indies. And Eduard Cuypers was the teacher not only of Michel de Klerk, but of all the most prominent and most formative architects for the so-called Amsterdam School movement. Here above we see a picture of the young architects of the Amsterdam School being trained, and sitting in the middle is Eduard Cuypers. Especially important for Michel de Klerk's career is his connection in the studio with Piet Kramer and Johan van der Meij. these were were his pals when he was doing his education at the studio of Eduard Cuypers, and together more or less they got the first assignment, which was the start of the Amsterdam School, which was the shipping house, and together they were the initiators of this very expressive architectural style. This style is always characterized as expressionist. We can also call it brick expressionism. And what I want to tell you more about today is, of course, at the backdrop of the exhibition, which is the influences of the Indonesian art, cultures, and religion on this building style. So before we go to that, I want to explain a little bit more about the context in which these architects were raised and in what kind of world they grew up in. First of all, the industrialization mentioned in the video just now was also a means to establish better connections between the Netherlands and the Dutch East Indies. In 1922, the radio station in Apeldoorn-Kootwijk was opened and made a radio connection to the radio station Malabar on the right near Bandung. But this counted also, of course, for shipping, and shipping lines were established. And because of the industrialization and steam and later engine shipping, it was possible for both Indonesians, but mostly for Europeans, to easily go to Indonesia. And this made that more people got there. And also, actually, in the studio of Eduard Cuypers, of which we have a picture here, there was already a lot of attention to Indonesia, and especially with regards to the crafts. The Amsterdam School style is a style of architecture, but also of design. And for both, these architects needed crafts, and crafts in the time of industrialization was something very very much at risk. It was in danger of being overruled by mechanical production, and these architects, they wanted to build in such a way that was only possible still with having good craftsmen. So the crafts are really key to the Amsterdam School as well. And they were not only interested in the Dutch crafts, but they were also interested in Indonesian crafts. And because Eduard Cuypers had a studio in the Dutch East Indies as well, he had also access to a lot of knowledge, and was also part of spreading that knowledge in the Netherlands through his magazine, mostly at Nederlands Nederlands en Nederlands Indisch Huis uit de Nieuw, which was later Nederlands Indie Hout Nieuw. And this was one of the things that these Amsterdam School architects were trained with attention to these Indonesian crafts. We might know Eduard Cuypers buildings in Indonesia. These are just two for illustration: the Javase Bank in Yogyakarta and the WEFA building in Surabaya. And in the magazine of Eduard Cuypers, we see there's this attention also to Indonesian crafts, and actually, because of the better connections established, you also see that there are a lot of Indonesians, mostly Sumatrans and Javanese, mostly also from the nobility, coming to the Netherlands beginning of the 20th century. They are being trained here in the European education system. One of them was also this man on the right, Noto Suroto, He was a poet, a writer, and was a proponent of Javanese culture in the Netherlands. And he was also an editor for the magazines of Eduard Kuiper. So this is one of the people that the Amsterdam School got in contact with from Indonesia. But there were also others, and also people that were more politically engaged than only cultural, such as Noto Suroto. For example, on the left we see Suwardi, which later was named Ki Hajar Dewantara, and his wife Surtatina. And they were here in the Netherlands, actually involuntarily. They met Chris Lebo in the Netherlands because they were exiled from the Dutch East Indies, because Suwardi himself was a proponent of Indonesian national education, so not Dutch education for Indonesians, but genuine Indonesian education. And for this, he was criticized and also looked out by the intelligence services in the Netherlands Indies. But when he wrote a pamphlet, Als ik eens Nederlander was, if I was a Dutchman, in 1913, he got banished. And this was because in 1913, there was a big celebration in the Dutch East Indies of the 100-year anniversary of the battle at Waterloo. And at Waterloo, Napoleon was defeated in Europe, and that meant the end of French occupation of the Netherlands. And this meant that the Netherlands was celebrating this 100 years of freedom, but Suwardi argued, who actually is free? And not us Indonesians, who are still third-class citizens in our own country. So this was a pamphlet that he criticized the colonial administration with, and the colonial system, and that was a reason for them to banish him. And ironically, then he went to the Netherlands and came into these circles, these artistic circles, amongst others, of the Amsterdam School. And among them was Chris Lebo, who's you see on the picture on the right. Chris Lebo was a social anarchist, a vegetarian, and a pacifist, and was also in that sense anti-colonial. Suwardi made a plan to get him back to the Netherlands Indies. They published a small advertisement in the newspapers in which they offered people the opportunity to buy this actual woodcut. He made a series of it, and with the money they got out of it, they wanted to send Suwardi back to the Netherlands Indies. Unfortunately, they didn't raise enough money, but the act in itself was, of course, subversive enough. Suwardi was also taken in by the Amsterdam School crowd, and in 1919, for example, he also wrote an article for the magazine Wendingen in the edition about dancing. So they established contact with Indonesian culture in this way, not only through knowledge production by Dutch Orientalists, but also through Indonesians, and in this case Javanese of the nobility directly. Another person that is relevant in this regard was Raden Jono. He was studying in the Netherlands economy, but when there was a natural disaster in Indonesia, he decided to raise money for, together with actually Noto Suroto and Suwardi and other Javanese in the Netherlands, to raise money for to have money for relief of this disaster. And they decided to make it a cultural evening. And Raden Jono's performance was so enthusiastically picked up that he decided to switch his career from doing economy to become a a dancer, but also an artist. He was a painter and an illustrator. And these images illustrate how various artists connected to the Amsterdam School. In the center, we have a painting by Nieuwenkamp, and to the right, we have a bust by Koenraad Altorf, how they all had their own idea of Raden Masjojono. And yeah, in the center we see Nieuwenkamp's painting as a very much portrayal of the more androgynous characteristics of Raden Masjojono. The painting is all white, so it has this feeling of purity. And to the right, the bust is more has more some mysticism to it. The closed eyes and the meditative states of Jojono are emphasized. So all the artists back in the day, they were influenced by this, or they put their own interpretation into Jojono, and took out of him what they desired themselves from Indonesian, and in this case Javanese culture. But there were also other means for the Amsterdam School architects and artists to learn about Indonesia and to get a feeling of Indonesian culture. And this was mostly through visiting museums, but also colonial exhibitions that were held all throughout Europe, and also in Indonesia itself, as this poster by Albert Haan testifies to. And these colonial exhibitions and colonial collections that were acquired came to the Netherlands, and that were also means for them to establish, to get knowledge from Indonesia. And the background of that is, of course, not always unviolent. For example, a lot of the Amsterdam School architects were fascinated with Balinese culture, but for that to happen, there was also the involvement of the colonial army. So we see that in 1906 there is this Bali expedition, and the painter we saw just now, W. Nieuwenkamp, was joining this expedition with the Dutch army as an embedded painter, or embedded drawer, you could say, a draftsman. So he went there, and he really disliked what he saw. He was he was critical in that sense, but he did play a role a big role in establishing colonial collections in the Netherlands. So, for example, in the Bali expedition, Nieuwenkamp also saw that the colonial army destroyed a lot of the cultural heritage of Bali, and that's why he decided to take, for example, the doors of the Puri in Denpasar, and they're still presently in the Leiden colonial, the Leiden Ethnographic Museum, because of this deed. So there are all these ways, in equal ways, but also violent ways to acquire these collections, and that was one of the ways the Amsterdam School architects could see those exhibitions and could acquire influence from them. So to the left we see, for example, a exhibition that was held in the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam in 1915, called Old Javanese and Present-Day Balinese Hinduism. And you see that, from the right, you see a drawing by Jan Torup, one of the artists that is also has an Indo-European background, who went to, for example, the Ethnographic Museum in Leiden to make drawings of these statues that were there, and in that way also became influenced by these kinds of exhibitions. There were, as I said, also colonial and world exhibitions throughout Europe. And one of them is particularly important if we talk about the Amsterdam School. In 1910 in Brussels, the Exposition Universelle et Internationale was held. And in this exhibition, the Dutch pavilion and the Dutch colonial pavilion, to be precise, were designed by the studio of Eduard Cuypers. And because his apprentices at the time were Michel de Klerk, Piet Kramer, and Johan van der Meij, they also had the opportunity to help him with his design. So they did. Michel de Klerk, we know for sure that went there. I will show you how we can know this. But important to know beforehand is that in the picture on the right, we see that there are some Indonesians also present in this colonial pavilion, because in the pavilion, the Indonesian crafts were displayed to the European audience. And here we see some of them. There were 12 in total, and they were, brought to Brussels to perform their crafts, such as batik, weaving, wood carving, smittery. So all these crafts they showed in Brussels, and it shows a bit of the unequal relations, of course. And Michel de Klerk himself went there, as I said, and he also portrayed two of them. Here are their portraits. To the left we have Sawia. She was a weaver from Silungkang in Sumatra, and she had a big weavery there with her husband, with about 30 people. And to the right we see Mas Bajuri, who was from Negawi in Java, and he was a woodcutter that was also considered a very good draftsman. And Michel de Klerk met him in Brussels and painted their portraits, as we can see. So this already tells you that there was, from the start of the education of the Amsterdam School architects and Michel de Klerk, there was a lot of input and a lot of interest in the Indonesian cultures as part of a Dutch colony. There was a big influence of Indonesian cultures and art in the Netherlands before 1914, but in the First World War, between 1914 and 1918, the people of the Amsterdam School, but also other artists in Europe, they started to see Europe as a place where the culture is in decay, and not only existential but also a cultural crisis was emerged from the First World War. And I will expand a little bit on this because it's very important to understand why these Amsterdam School architects were interested in Indonesian culture and why they used it in their own designs. So the First World War between 1914 and 1918 was one of the moments in Europe where architects and intellectuals and actually all of Europe saw at a very big mass scale the destruction of one another. There was this model of very aggressive nationalism that made it that all the European nations were divided and were fighting each other. And this was actually a war that lasted very long and took many lives, and made people realize that that European culture is in decay. To the right, you see some cartoons that express this sentiment from the circles of the Amsterdam School. In the upper corner, we see a drawing cartoon by Albert Hahn, where it says, "Coming spring, the earth is in flowers, blossoming." But instead of flowers, we see, of course, the bombs, and below we see another cartoon by Albert Hahn, where you see a German and a French soldier fighting for global domination. And this also brings in this imperial aspect that was noticed at the time. And yeah, this sentiment made a lot of people in Europe desperate, and they were looking for new ways to re-envision Europe and to revitalize culture. And instead of turning back to European history, it was the time for them to look across borders and to see where there will be other societies and other parts of the world that were, of course, coming closer because of the colonial relations, as I argued before, and to see if there was a possibility for a new way. And they were dreaming of this new society that could emerge from the rubble of this First World War. So that is how the Amsterdam School went to look for Indonesian sources. Here we see a drawing, a woodcut by Nieuwenkamp that he made in Bali, where he was a lot. And yeah, we could see this kind of imagery in Bendingen, the magazine of the Amsterdam School. And this could be regarded as sort of the polar opposites from this mass destruction of the First World War, where there's violence and mechanical violence. In this woodcut, we see somebody meditating within a temple entrance, and this sense of tranquility is exactly what, for the Amsterdam School architects was a way to see how another society could emerge. Also, architect Berlage, who made a journey into Bali in 1923, was very amazed by the culture he saw there, and especially by the idea that art could be built by a community, so not by professionals such as in the West, but actually that all people could be artists and all people joined in to make a society. And this was a very rosy way of looking at it. If you remember the other side of that in the Bali expedition, but this was for Berlage very much a society to take as a sort of utopia, and would be something to strive towards. So he envisioned Bali as a place where the people lived closer to nature, something which the industrialization had wrecked in the West, and where people could be living together in a harmonious way. So this kind of way of looking at Bali for this in this example, but it counts for many other Indonesian cultures as well in the archipelago, was also taken up by Hendrik Theodor Beideveld. And Beideveld was one of the key figures also in the Amsterdam School movement, and was a long time chief editor of the magazine Bendingen. And he also noted this connection between, or he also makes palpable this connection between the destruction of the First World War and the envisionment of a new culture for the West that is based on, for example, Bali and other non-European nations. And he goes to an exhibition in Arsitektur Amicitia in 1917, in the middle of the First World War, and he noticed that this beauty that Bali has and this potential to bring change to European culture, and that's why he writes the following. In Arsitektur Amicitia, there was the photographic exhibition of Gregor Krause, and he writes in a review the following: "The thought that so much natural beauty, so much poetry is gathered somewhere on this earth among humans makes much of today's miseries bearable." So here we see this clear connection, because today is of course referencing his today, which is in 1917. And yeah, it lays this connection between yeah, seeing the European culture in decay and having a utopic counterexample and something to strive for in Balinese culture and other Indonesian cultures. Also, when we look closer at Wendingen, we actually see that there is a lot of Eastern orientation in its contents and in its design, actually. So to the left, we have the first edition of Wendingen, designed by Laurix, where we see there's also an influence of Japanese art. For example, from the wave of Kanagawa by Hokusai. There was, of course, this influence of Japanism attached to this, but also the size of Wendingen, 33 by 33, references the tatami floor mats in Japan. So there was this, yeah, from the start, this orientation on the East, you can say. And in other volumes of Wendingen, there was attention for the Eastern cultures, but also more specifically, as the one on the right shows you, about Hindu-Buddhist sculpture and Hindu-Buddhist temples. So yeah, you see that Wendingen has a very much orientation on Indonesia and on the East. And yeah. So now we'll turn to some of the examples, because now I've sketched out a little bit how the way looks that Indonesian culture arrives in the Netherlands through people, through knowledge production, through colonial collections. And I've explained this sort of, yeah, way of looking at Indonesia by this Amsterdam School architects that, if you take it into account, is really much informed by the needs of their own problems, their own way of trying to achieve and trying to forward a new culture and a new society, and yeah, trying to redefine what Western culture is by appropriating the ones from the East. So let's first look at temples from the Dutch East Indies and how they influenced Dutch architecture of the Amsterdam School. First, and this is an example that has already been noted by art historian Hanneke Olieslager in the 80s. The Borobudur was a very important source of inspiration for many architects. In 1912, we see that the Borobudur was renovated, and in its slipstream there was a lot of attention for this Buddhist temple, which is now one of the main tourist attractions in Java. And yeah, the Borobudur has been built up in various plateaus, and on these plateaus we have these stupas, and these stupas are seen here on the right. They are originally meant as the place where the relics of the Buddha himself were stored, and in each of those stupas the Buddha is enshrined. These shapes and this symbolism with death and reincarnation has also been noticeable in Michel de Clercq's work in many forms. And on the left we see one of the designs of de Clercq that was never realized, of a chapel, a morning chapel on a graveyard that was actually had the motto of reincarnation. And this is just one of the examples. We see the stupa shape returning in architecture of Michel de Clercq and other architects more. For example, when we look at the right, the yellow building is block 2 in the Spaarnummerbuurt, which is across the street from Museum at Schip. A building built by in a commission by Housing Association Eigen Haard, My Own Fireplace, if I translate it. And this was a socialist building block where this was built also in the middle of the First World War, where you also see this this symbol of mourning, but also of reincarnation and revitalization, which was very attractive to this Amsterdam School architect. In the center, we see a bridge house on one of the bridges by Piet Kramer, which also resembles this stupa shape. And to the far left, we see another window by architect Zeidsma in the south of the city of Amsterdam. So we have also these other building elements that reference to the stupa. Another element that has been noted also by Olieslager is the Dageraad. The Dageraad is a big housing complex in the south of the city and was part of Berlage's Plan South, which we heard about in the video. And in these buildings that were designed by Michel de Klerk and Piet Kramer together, we see a creative translation also of Indian and Indonesian temples, mostly Hinduist temples. So not only Indonesian influence, but here we see also influence from India. Another example that we see are related to temples is this one. This was a building created in 1920, between 1920 and 1922. It was an auction house for flowers. And Michel de Klerk was the architect, and in it we see that this kind of applied sculptures that we encounter in Indonesian temples. To the right we see, for example, the Kalpaverska of the Candi Mendut and Candi Prambanan. These elements Michel de Klerk clearly incorporated into his sculptures of his buildings, and this applied sculpture is strongly present in for example the reliefs of the Borobudur, which had there was a lot of attention for by these architects. Hildo Krop, one of the main sculptors that was part of the Amsterdam School movement, was also very much inspired by the Hindu-Buddhist sculptures in this applied sense. To the left, we see one of the sculptures on the Scheepvaarthuis, the first Amsterdam school building that was built by Michel de Klerk, Piet Kramer, and Johan van der Meij as lead architect. And we noticed that there's also like a Buddha here, but it also counts for the aesthetic of these sculptures. And there's this very applied sculpture aspect that really returns to sculptures from Indonesian temples. For example, Hildo Krop also mentioned this influence in his work when he was in contact with his biographer, and he wrote to her in a letter that if a sculpture is done right, you need to be able to see it as a pure piece of plaster. Only think of the Borobudur. If you were to release a figure from this relief, you would have a nice and free statue. The same applies to temples from the Indies, and the same must also apply to modern sculpture. End of quote. So here he also makes a connection not only to the inspiration he got from Indonesian sculpture, but also he connects that again to the way modern sculpture should be directed towards. So I've taken some examples of temples, but there are also examples from vernacular architecture, so Indonesian vernacular architecture, that return in a creative sense in the Amsterdam School. And note that what I said earlier about Berlage also counts for a lot of the Amsterdam School architects. This movement wanted to establish a sort of community art, and was very much interested in the ways that everybody could join in and make art. So they were especially interested in vernacular architecture, this architecture without architects, and this art without artists. This idea of joining together and making a total work of art was for them a very attractive idea. And you see that in some of the Amsterdam School buildings. As colonization spread further, and also the Dutch administration spread further throughout the archipelago, there were was a lot of knowledge production by Dutch scholars and Orientalists that didn't only went to Java, but also went more to the outer regions, which was called how it was called back then. For example, they went to Sumatra. In Sumatra, you have the Batak. This is an example of a house of the Toba Batak, and this kind of knowledge production also came back to this kind of influence also came back to the Netherlands. Here we see a picture taken by Jan. A picture taken by Jan Baanders. Jan Baanders and Herman Baanders had a studio in which de Klerk also was employed for a certain time, and the two of them were good friends. Jan Baanders is also considered part of the Amsterdam School movement, and in his work, he also applied. So he went to Indonesia and collected these pictures and made these pictures, and you can also see that returning in his own architecture. For example, for the Vondelpark, he made this small kiosk in which you clearly see the resemblance of the Karo Batak architecture, which he made a picture of in the center. So not only temple architecture, but also this vernacular architecture, this Indonesian vernacular architecture was of interest to them. Another good example of that is the following building, which is built by Guillaume Lacroix in 1919. Guillaume Lacroix was equally one of the apprentices of Eduard Cuypers, and he built this building for the shipping company called Koppe. Today in the Netherlands, we call it the NACO house. And also here we see the out-hanging roof and the horns attached to the facade that have these references towards Indonesian vernacular architecture, and in specific with this regard Batak architecture. Mostly it's referenced as Minangkabau architecture, but if you look at Minangkabau, it's quite different. So. Another example of this vernacular architecture influence is, for example, this villa built by Wouters and Brandes in Wassenaar, the Villa Schouwenhoek. And also here we see not only the implied sculpture again, but also we see the shape of the parables that you see also in the vernacular architecture in Indonesia. So far I've talked about architecture, but we also see these Indonesian influences in design, and more specifically furniture. Take this clock by Michel de Klerk, about which art historian Frans van Burkom wrote an article. This was also displayed at the Stedelijk Museum in 2016 in the large Amsterdam School exhibition. And if we look at this clock, then we also see that in the detailed elements of it, there are references to Indonesian culture. For example, in this element, we see a reference to the kala heads on temples, guarding the temples. Here below we see one of those kala heads of the Candi Singasari, and this symbolism was also applied in applied arts, as we can see this clock. Also, Piet Kramer was very much into the Eastern cultures and also therefore Indonesian elements. So when we look at some of its interiors, we also notice this influence of, for example, the accessories that Wayang Wong dancers are wearing during performances. They're very creative translations, but the influence is quite striking. Also, this is the influences that Frans van Berkom has noted in one of his articles. Maybe you also are thinking now, still. Oh, I think somebody's. Yeah. Another thing that you might ask, like, what was there? Was there a deeper layer to this way of taking Indonesian elements in their own architecture and designs? Was it merely just applying the one thing to the other? And if you see, actually, you already maybe saw that in the previous examples, there's a lot of influences from Hinduism and Buddhism, and not so much from Islam. The Dutch at the time really considered the Hindu-Buddhist civilizations of Java as a sort of bedrock of Indonesian culture, and they really did not have as much attention for Islam, although it was the biggest religion then, of course, as well. So that's quite a selective kind of way of looking at Indonesian culture, and has also got to do a lot with the political atmosphere at the time, in which, for example, in 1912, the Tarekat Islam was already established, and Islam was also one of the motors of establishing anti-colonial nationalism. So in this way, many Dutch thought it was safer to associate and to identify the Java and Indonesia with this Hindu-Buddhist tradition instead of the Islamic tradition, which was also, of course, very influential. But this also meant another thing, namely that these architects and artists were interested in the religions of Indonesia. So and they were interested in a very specific way. In the Netherlands and in Europe, of course, secularization had progressed, and in spite of the in the slipstream of this secularization, you see that there is still this longing for meaning making, and in this period where secularization is only partly done, you see that there is this sentiment that there should be new bedrocks bedrocks of meaning making that are not tied to institutions. In the Netherlands, there was, of course, the pillarization, the verzuiling, as we call it. And this was a way of organizing that, was creating more polarization. And they sought out, a sort of de-institutional ways to bring the world together, and to also envision a world together where they wanted to bridge and connect Eastern religions with Western religions. And Theosophy and Sufism were two of those movements that were very prominent in the Netherlands. Theosophy the most, but Sufism also. To the left, we see Eduard Cuypers when he was in the Indies, and to the right, we see one of the, actually sort of one of the drawings by de Klerk, in which you see already this influence, for example, of Buddhism in his work. He drew a kind of a caricature of Cuypers sitting in a meditation pose. And yeah, you see that Theosophy was a very current movement at the time. So, for example, Laurix and the Basel, the two people that were part of the initiation of Wendingen, the magazine of the Amsterdam School, they were very convinced Theosophians, and they also founded their own theosophical education, and they founded the Theosophical Lodge, the Vahanya Lodge in the Netherlands. And a lot of the architects and artists from the Amsterdam School followed this education, but also were part of these circles in which Theosophy was current. And note this cover of the magazine Theosophia, where you have an assemblage of a lot of cultural, religious elements that are combined. And the general idea of Theosophy was this: that Eastern and Western religion should be brought together, and all share in a higher meaning. So they're all explanations of a similar divine power that should be approached in their work by certain working methods, but also by looking at nature as a source, as the video also explained. Theosophy was also something in which a lot of Indonesians could engage. Here we see a picture of the Theosophical Society in Bandung in around 1910, and you see that there is this big mixage of different kinds of people. So this also, the Theosophy movement in the Indies also had a sort of destabilizing potential on these colonial hierarchies that were present. If you look closely here in the right hand side.
Do you still have a lot to present?
Some, yes.
It's already 2:15, so
okay. I will
discussion also.
Yeah, I will wrap it up. Thank you. So yeah, here you see the founder of the Theosophical Society, Helena Blavatsky, and here to the right you see, for example, Buddha and Jesus Christ. So this is really a characteristic of the Theosophical movement. I will go quickly through these slides. This is again Piet Kramer, who was more invested in Sufism, universal Sufism to be precise, and that's why he also took Japanese influences, but also, as we saw, Indonesian influences in his own work. Now I will quickly show you some of the last examples that I have regarding Amsterdam School influences in Indonesia. And I will be short about this because this is also not where the weight of the exhibition was about. And this is actually a part of the project that we want to engage more in with our Indonesian partners of Pusat Dokumentasi Arsitektur and Yayasan Museum Arsitektur. So this is still terrain that needs to be excavated. But one central figure I do want to tell you about, that is Lim Wan Chi. Lim Wan Chi was of Chinese, Indonesian, or Peranakan descent. And he came, like many of his peers, to the Netherlands to be educated. He, after his education as an architect, he went to work with Michel de Clercq, and that is why we turned special attention to him also in the exhibition. Lim Wan Chi was following education and working at Michel de Clercq's studio in 1917 and 1918, and therefore was involved in many of his important projects. He worked on the Schip, for example, as a drawer, and also on the second block of Michel de Clercq. And in his work, you also see influences of the organic architecture that the Amsterdam School has. For example, in this design for a chair. Together with de Klerk, he also made this design for the National Academy for Visual Arts, which was awarded second place. But I will go through it a little bit faster. He was also an architect that not only took inspiration for the Amsterdam School, but also was strongly invested in his Peranakan heritage, and therefore also oriented towards China, which we also see in his designs. He also went to China between 1926 and 1927, for this reason. Back in the Netherlands, Indies in 1929, he started making, in the first time in Semarang, he built a lot of public housing, just like the Amsterdam School architects. But later you see that he becomes invested in much more other architectural styles, such particularly he becomes interested in the architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright, which is famous for his appliance of smooth appliance of buildings in the natural environment. And that is also what Liu Machi wanted to achieve with the villas he built for a lot of the Chinese, more wealthy Chinese customers he had. Cosmo Citroen is also one of the architects that has influence for the Amsterdam School, but I will not go into this much longer. And I've said about some of the examples here that refer back to the Amsterdam School style. This is a building by Job and Sprey that has clearly influenced from the Amsterdam School. Finally, there was also a monument constructed in the 30s by the sculptor Hendrik van der Einde and the architect Willem Dudok of the Van Huts monument, to show you that they're not only politically one way to approach the Amsterdam School, but also you have people that are more invested into more conservative and imperialist mindsets. And of course, this monument was destroyed in the 50s after the Indonesian independence. But given the time span, I will not go into this so much more.
Please.
And we will open up the discussion to the floor.
Yeah.
Sorry for my expansion of the time.
Do you still have pictures? You can say, okay. So
yeah.
That's the last one.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Melle, for the presentations. This is the introductions about the architectural style of Amsterdam School, especially to the Indonesian participants, because it is not much known in Indonesia, despite the fact that the influence of Indonesia is relatively strong. I would like to attract your attentions to the chat. Petra Timmer asked questions for those of you who knows about the architect Suryo Winoto. Maybe Petra, can you say yourselves and tell quickly why you want to have more information about this architecture in few seconds, please.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Okay. Well, I was interested in Suryo Winoto because he is mentioned by Berlage, the architect Berlage, and his Mijn Indische Reis, my Indonesian journey, that he made in 1923. And he wrote about the Suryo Winoto, but I couldn't find anything about him except for what he wrote about de Regentswoning, of the house of the regent. And it was published in this Edward Kuipers magazine of het Indonesische Huis Oud en Nieuw. I couldn't find anything about him, but for Berlage, he was very important in this relation between the Indonesian architecture and modern architecture and how to develop a new Indonesian, he didn't call it Indonesian, of course, but a new Indies architecture. And so I'm curious about this person, and I thought there are so many Indonesians now involved. Perhaps this name rings a bell, and I can know more about him. That was my question.
Thank you, Petra. For all participants, especially those from Indonesia, you also can ask your questions or give comments in bahasa. Jadi bisa pakai bahasa Indonesia juga. Silahkan nanti kami coba bantu dengan penerjemahan ke dalam bahasa Inggris. Silahkan. Rosalia Rahma, untuk Yos Wibisono, I have seen your hand, but I will give the floor to the chat first. They came earlier. Rosalia Rahma, do you want to speak directly? There is no response. Rosalia Rahma, are you with us? Okay. We give a chance to Jos then. Please, Jos.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the lecture. I'm at, at the end of it, you mentioned, that the Amsterdam School was also involved in the building of the Van Heut's Museum, Van Heut's Monument in Jakarta and Batavia. Now it's actually Taman Lawang now. And by the beginning of it, your lecture, you mentioned about how close they were with Noto Suroto and Suhardi Suryaningrat and his wife Sutartina. Well, it makes me wonder, what is actually the Amsterdam School's view on colonialism? Do they think Indonesia only as a source of inspiration, or they also support the aspiration of an independent Indonesia? How about their view about Indonesia as an independent state, separate from the Netherlands? Thank you.
Yeah, I want to. It's okay if I respond directly.
Yes,
Hasti?
of course, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's one of the questions that was in my mind a lot. Yeah, researching and doing this project, and I don't think I can give you a very clear-cut answer, I'm afraid. And that is mostly because all these Amsterdam School architects and artists, they are very diffuse. For example, de Klerk is known to be a very leftist, but didn't want to say anything about politics and didn't write about anything about politics. So he considered himself more as an autonomous artist, and so for Michel de Klerk's case, I'm inclined to say that he would not easily be put as an anti-colonial per se, given his influences of Indonesian art. Then maybe it's more going to, yes, he just wanted to take these elements out of Indonesian culture that he could transform and make useful for his own iconography. But I don't think there's sort of a spiritual connection with it. So it is something that's he feels, I guess, is part of this revitalization of the world and this utopic worldview that he has through his art. So art and society in that kind of way are sort of combined. And but there are also like architects such as Chris Lebeau or artists as Chris Lebeau, who really were vocal anti-militarists and therefore also very anti-colonial. So you do have these circles in which that is very much at stake. And I think that also their own views on colonialism changes, of course, in the decades when also anti-colonial nationalism in Indonesia is on the rise. So I think that each time it will differ. And of course, in the end, you sell the Van Heut's monuments. well, Van Heuts was, of course, not so much anti-colonial, let's say. He was the symbol for imperialism, and was also regarded as such at the time. So you had, of course, in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, the Van Heuts monument, which prompted a large debate, and many sculptors refused the assignment. But for Van der Einde, we can at least say that building in the 1930s, he was not anti-colonial, because he didn't want to refuse this job. And so I think this movement of architects and artists, they have various positions in this debate. So maybe that is the difficult, but the answer I can give you.
Thank you. Jos, are you okay with the response? Yeah, I think okay. Thank you. Rosalia Rahma has a problem to speak her questions directly, so I will read her questions. She wants to know what the difference between architectural designs of Catholic Church in Netherlands and during the modern movement with Indonesia. I don't know if this related to Amsterdam School, but just respond to what extent what you could understand. Otherwise,
if I interpret the question correctly, she's asking about how, because the Amsterdam School had a quite of a socialist inclination, that is that also the Amsterdam School part of Catholic design, like Catholic Church design? Is that maybe? Yeah. Because I think, as it ties into the question before here. Some of the Amsterdam School architects were also could also be Catholically oriented. So they were not only socialists. And actually, there have, in the Netherlands at least, been built a lot of churches also in the Amsterdam School style. So I think that religion was not a thing that divided these Amsterdam School architects. But I'm not sure if this is the answer that
no problem. I mean, you have responded to the best of knowledge that you could. For those for Indonesians, especially students and teachers who need certificates, there's information how you get the certificates in the chat. So please read and respond to that. I would like to ask Nadia Purwestri, the Executive Director of the Arsitektur Dokumentasi Center in Jakarta, who participate as supporting organizations to the exhibitions. But last December, she also visited the exhibitions in Amsterdam. So probably you could share your impressions about the exhibitions, but also as an expert, your impressions about influence of Indonesia in Amsterdam School. Please, Nadia. Can you unmute, please? Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, now it's clear. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Hasti, and thank you, Melle, for your very interesting presentation. I'm lucky that I had the opportunity to visit this exhibition at the Schip Museum last December. And I think this exhibition is very interesting, especially because this topic, Amsterdam School, is rarely discussed in Indonesia. So for the Indonesian, I believe that this exhibition can give more information about this Amsterdam School movement, because we learn only a little about this topic when we studied architecture in Indonesia. So I'm very glad, and I'm happy to have a collaboration with the museum Schip for this seminar or this webinar. think that was my opinion today.
Thank you, very much, Nadia. I think we are glad to hear your comments and impressions, and hopefully, probably in the next webinars, we will hear more from you about these topics. Thank you very much, and good evening, enjoying the webinar. Yeah, and then there is a questions from not questions. Wait a minute, from Olga. Olga, would you like to say yourselves about your questions? It is half in Dutch and half in English.
Yeah, well, I don't have a question, or maybe it is the question why it was.
Yes, please go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, 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 yeah.
Okay.
We don't see your video, but it's okay as long as we can hear your voice.
Okay. Well, I had a remark actually, but you can say it's a question. Why I didn't hear anything about the Dutch term ereschuld regarding the Dutch and Indies politics and how this influenced the art and architecture in this period. There was ethical politics that was made official in 1901 in the troonrede of our queen. And that was based on a document that was written earlier by a political liberal called Van Deventer about the politics and about how the Dutch actually gained a lot of money from this colonialism and how it wasn't fair, and that the Dutch had a debt of honor to Indonesian people for what they did during the colonial time. And that is why they started looking at the vernacular art in Indonesia. And Rufar, who wrote a lot of pamphlets and magazine articles and books, he pulled all this into the arts and architecture. So this Amsterdam School style, of course, developed around 1916 with het Scheepvaarthuis. But already in 1901, this was in the troonrede of the Queen mentioned, this debt of honor, and that it already started a long time before 1916 actually. And I didn't hear anything about this in the lecture today, so maybe I missed it, or is it not known?
Thank you, Olga. Melle, would you like to comment?
Of course. Thank you for the remark / question. Yeah, I'm very familiar with ethical policy, and also with the way that it was picked up by some of the Dutch scholars such as Rufar, who was also indeed putting his money where his mouth is, and also trying to engage with the Indonesian crafts, trying also to seek a market in the Netherlands for products from Indonesian crafts. I think it's sort of it's related in an indirect way. I mean, these Amsterdam School architects were of course known with this policy and this shift in colonial policy. But I think we do have to see that also this ethical policy is a kind of an ambiguous thing. It has at once wants to elevate the Indonesians, but it also does so within a colonial way of thinking, in a colonial context. So it is really, for the ethical policy people, they are not anti-colonial per se. They want to reform a colonial policy to have it more just for Indonesians in that period. And I think, yeah, these debates were, of course, known by the Amsterdam School architects. And yeah, maybe it ties again back to the first question, that yeah, all these architects and artists, they responded to it in various ways. It's not a very satisfying answer maybe, but I think that is how it went. And of course, this attention by the crafts, or the attention for the Indonesian crafts, was something that they got from people like Rufaar. These people, artists before the Amsterdam School, the Art Nouveau artists, these were the people that, of course, yeah, made sure that there were all these kinds of crafts products in the Netherlands, and had the knowledge about it. So these were, in that way, teachers of this fascination and the practical side of it, the actual implementation of these crafts. So
Yeah, okay.
I think they're related in this way.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think
thank you.
It's very interesting, and thank you, Olga, to raise this issue, and for Indonesian participants. So, but all participants, especially for the architects. So, yeah, the architectural style of Amsterdam School, but maybe other style also, that has influence in the past. It can be very political also. So that makes this issue interesting. And I think now we can see it as a very good lesson learned, and also we can deeper our knowledge about it. And I would like to give a good news from the organizations. Thank you that that the recording of this webinar will be available for those who came late to join this webinar. But also the booklets exhibitions in Bahasa Indonesia is also now available for free. You can download it through the address that given in the chat. Thank you, everyone in the organizations. Petra.
Yes,
please.
I have a question. It also refers to Jos Wibisono, and also to the question and remark of Olga. Well, I'm busy with Berlage's travel to Indonesia, and I'm talking with Melle and Schip about that too, because it was in the period of the Amsterdam School. They were not closely related, but there is a strong connection, that's true. Well, this Berlage talks more about colonization and his criticism about it, and about the independence, the coming independence of Indonesia that he foresees. But my question is, maybe especially to Jos, because you had this question, are you interested in these kind of positions of Dutch artists, architects, or travelers into Indonesia? Is it a question that lives in Indonesia? That's what I wonder. Because I was, well, that's about your question, my remark to that.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Would you like to respond to this, Melle, or Jos, maybe?
I think it was a question to Jos, so I think he's better equipped to answer than I am.
Well, the thing is, because there's a, you see in Indonesia there is a rage on history. So after the demise of Suharto, people get more and more interested in history. First because you know what happened in 1965, but now it goes further to during the colonial time, and there are, as far as colonial time is concerned, there are two important things happened last year, which is the visit of the Dutch king, and then he bid an apology, and also the visit of the apology offered by the Dutch Prime Minister after the publication of the results of the research to Indonesian War of Independence. those two apologies are very important here in the Netherlands, but they don't really have a sound in Indonesia. People are not responding it quite enthusiastically as now, when the Indonesian government put up a list of 8 objects that they want to be back to Indonesia. So now they want the how do you say that, the interest, and then they want to know more about what happened in the colonial time. Why, for instance, the Bois collection is in the Netherlands, and why the Dutch government, why the Indonesian government wants to have it back. So people are asking about it, and also, I mean, they're in the press. There's a lot of is written about it, and this is perhaps an information for you, Melle, because I think I'm going to talk to you about it, especially because Tempo has commissioned me to write a report on the exhibition on the Schip. Tempo, you see, Tempo is a big magazine in Indonesia. It was, you know, and the last year of Suharto, it was forbidden by Suharto. They commissioned me to write about the repatriation of the 8 objects that the Indonesian government is asking, and I proposed to him, because I was so impressed by your exhibition, Melle. I went to see it, and I proposed to them, you should write something about this, and also they're very interested in Yojana. So yeah, I'm going to write something about it, and so you see the interest. It's not about the apologies, but more about, you know, about the objects, and about about Yojana, about the exhibition of Amsterdam School. So yeah, there is more of an interest in Indonesia as far as the past is concerned, and not only about not about the apology, but about what's going on in the past, why the collections are in the Netherlands, why the Netherlands are, you know, having this influence of Indonesia in their architecture. So yeah, so that's why I'm interested to know whether these proponents of Amsterdam School also have how they viewed colonialism.
Thank you.
So yeah,
well, I think that's the open-minded ways of looking at our shared history that is the most important, and it's so nice that now we can talk this on a healthy and constructive manners. That's the most important. So Jos, we are looking forward to read your article in Tempo, especially for the Indonesian readers. Yeah. Petra, do you? I see still your raised hand. You want to comment or something? Please be quick.
Me? Yes. Well, I had. This was my question.
Oh no, because you didn't
but
put
I
down
have
your
another
hand.
question. But maybe first other people should have their chance to ask or to make.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
I can come back.
Actually, I would like to hear more of the voices from Indonesia. So please. Those participants, please give your comments. Probably this is the first time you hear the terms about Amsterdam School, which you never heard before. It's okay. I mean, we all learned it. I see, for example, the younger generations presentations. Angelina Basuki, for example. I know that you involve a lot in architecture and cooperations with the Netherlands. Would you share with us your impressions when you hear about Amsterdam School? So, well, my generations, when we were at schools, we tend to be silent in the class. But I think now the current generations is different. So you are more talkative. Otherwise, or probably I would like ask Anita Halim. Anita Halim is in Makassar. She is architect and she involves in the preparations of the exhibitions. I would like to ask you to share impressions represents Indonesian young architect. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Hasti. I think it is a pleasure for me to participate in the preparation of this exhibition. And I learned a lot about Indonesian architecture during this preparation. And I think it's a very precious experience for me to look at Indonesian architecture from the lens of Amsterdam School architects.
Did you know that Indonesia has a lot of influence in the Netherlands in terms of
No.
architecture development?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what also struck me, that when I realized, because when we talk about shared heritage, until this point still, we learn more about the Dutch influence in Indonesia, but not the other way around. So that's why we were very enthusiastic about these exhibitions, because it shows about influence of Indonesia in the Netherlands. So it gives an opportunity to have a more balanced look at the history. And I think for Indonesians, this is very interesting fact. At least for me, that's very interesting. Okay, Petra.
Anita, do you recognize it? I wonder, do you recognize we say it and we see it ourselves, but do you recognize it with Indonesian eyes? It's not only a question to you, but also to all the other Indonesians.
I think it's at first when I look at Amsterdam School architecture, when I first arrived in Amsterdam, I just feel a sense of familiarity in those kind of architecture, but not necessarily from Indonesia. It's just like these Eastern influences that I feel when I walk in the neighborhood that has a lot of Amsterdam School architecture, and I just really appreciate it, but I don't know why. And then it's just only when I helped Melle with the exhibition that I realized that why I felt this sense of familiarity when I'm first looking at them. Yeah.
In the room, we also have someone who is not an architect, but she is an artist representing painting art. And Gadis Witriana Putri, she's also helping with the exhibitions. But I think it's also interesting to hear her view as an artist of the painting, because that also has a lot of influence, like Melle has presented. Please, Adis, share your impressions with us.
Well, it's been long since I practiced as an artist, but maybe I can comment a little bit from, I've started pursuing study and career in conservation. So I think within the influence of material culture, also for me, I share the same sentiment with Anita, that a lot of the things that previously are familiar to me is how the Dutch influence Indonesia. And I can't speak that at length about architecture, but what we learned during the schools is, Art Nouveau, but there's never really that much awareness on how the opposite actually happened. And during the research process, looking at the objects that was produced in the Colonial Research Institute in Haarlem, it was becoming more apparent how the exchange is two ways. So I guess there's still a lot of knowledge gaps and more research to be done, especially from what is still currently still exists in Indonesia in terms of the archives or the objects that we haven't really thought of how much the either Dutch thought or vice versa still exists. So I think that's my 2 cents.
Thank you very much. Well, I think I'm not an architect either. So, but Amsterdam School is not necessarily only about architecture. I think that's something what I've learned from presentations of Melle. Yeah, so everybody is, and please let me know in a few seconds to speak Bahasa. That's probably comfortable for our Indonesian friends. Bapak Ibu sekalian, silahkan kalau mau berkomentar. Saya melihat banyak nama yang sangat terkenal sekali di Indonesia, baik sebagai pelajar, student, ataupun sebagai dosen-dosen. Tolong memberi komentarnya, kesan-kesan saja bagaimana setelah mendengarkan presentasi kali ini. Itu akan sangat membantu dan kami sangat hargai sekali. Tidak usah pakai kamera kalau malu. Silahkan. Mungkin ada 1 atau 2 yang mau berbagi kesannya. Well, Melle, it's a long sentence, but basically I ask what is their impressions after your after your presentations. Silahkan, ada 1 atau 2 yang mau membagi kesannya. Tidak usah pakai kamera. Mudah-mudahan ada yang mendengarkan. Ya. It's completely silent from the other part of the world.
Boleh saya komentar?
Oh, silahkan Ibu Himasari. Aduh, silahkan. Ibu atau Mbak, maaf, silahkan memperkenalkan diri.
Ya, ya karena nggak ada yang membahas ya. Jadi ya kalau kami sih yang di sekolah sudah tahu atau sudah kenal bahwa terjadi pengaruh timbal balik. Sorry, I have to speak in English.
Yeah, maybe can you mention which institutions are you from?
I am from ITB, Department of Architecture. So I'm teaching the history of architecture and especially the modern architecture in Indonesia, which is Amsterdam School is one of the topic in my lecture. So we know already that amazingly Indonesia has a great influence to the Amsterdam School. The issue is that the influence is, or the Indonesian appreciation of the Indonesian art and architecture is taken mostly in Amsterdam School as an ornament, as just as a decoration for the building, but not very much that we know about the influence of the architecture itself. So Indonesian art is mostly appreciated as a decoration for the European architecture or for the modern architecture of in the Netherlands. So what makes maybe important for us is the way the European or the Netherlands look at Indonesian, for example, is still in the frame of in the how do you say that? In the way of thinking that what is exotic from Indonesia is the ornament. It's not the technicality or the building itself, but it's more on the ornament. So maybe the problem is up to now, architecture of Indonesian is mostly known as famous as its capacity for producing more ornamentality, or how do you say that, more decorational element. That's what's a pity. We haven't learned how that the architect of Indonesian at that time, the how do you say, the uneducated architect is appreciated or it's respected by the European, not the way how they produce building without any formal education, for example. But they just seen that what is interesting from Indonesia is just the ornament. That's my
Thank
impression.
you very much, Ibu Himasari. We really appreciate your thought. And since we only have 5 minutes left, so there is one other questions from Dama. Wait a minute. Dama Pamana. He wants to ask whether the buildings in Netherlands, they were influenced from the Indies, archives, or documented in the Netherlands. So probably you can reply to two things altogether, because we only have 5 minutes.
Yes. For the second question, I can be really quick. Yes, there are many archives in the Netherlands that store all this, drawings, photographs, texts about buildings in Indonesia.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is also something I know that, for example, is high on the agenda at Nieuwe Instituut, like the Architecture Museum and Documentation Center in Rotterdam. They are working on making this material accessible online and through other means for also Indonesian students and researchers and architects, and for everybody basically. So if you want to have a chat about that, I'm really open to do that. So please email me, then we can talk about it more if you like, because it's a very important topic for a lot of people, because that's the access to the information about their history and Indonesian history as well. So I think it's a nice that should be addressed. And to respond to Himasari, this is also a thing that I find very interesting, and I'm always wondering what in Indonesia the debate is about. And thank you for giving me an impression of that, because in the Netherlands we have of course discussions about like cultural appropriation and what the ethics of cultural influences are, and it's a difficult topic. And I for this lecture I tried to explain like what for the architects back then was their interest in Indonesia. And of course, now we look at it with a different point of view, and that is something that also strikes me, and I already touched upon it. I think with the question of Jos, that some people thought it was sort of parts that they could appropriate ornaments or elements from Indonesian culture and put it in a totally different context. Would help them show a new kind of society which that should rise out of the ashes of the First World War to open up a new society. So this was sort of the perspective these people had back then. And of course it's you can notice it in buildings in Indonesia too, I guess. This use of Indonesian ornaments, which is a bit superficial. But thank you for giving your opinion about this.
It's a very valuable point of view, Ibu Himasari, and probably we can explore more in the next webinar at the 1st of March about Indonesian influence. With the two speakers, Frans Ledemeyer and Sadia Boonstra, both are experts. But the voices of Indonesia, of course, should be heard too. So if you join the webinar, but also you speak up more, that probably the voice of Indonesia can be more can exist too in the whole discussion. Yes, please, Ibu Himasari, do you still have a comment?
Yeah, okay, I will be
Okay,
delighted.
yeah, please,
I will join. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Ibu Himasari. And for those, oh yeah, please, Ibu Himasari, Petra would like to have your email address, but also there is an email address of Melle in the chat for those who want to have more discussions. And thank you for Setia Sopandi for sharing the website's address about the archives. And for those, especially for Indonesian students and teachers who want to have certificates, in the chats there is a way how do you get certificates. So when this webinar finish, probably we wait for a few minutes to give an opportunity for those who want to have certificates to still be able to send a chat. Please go to a little bit higher on the chats, and there is a way how to do it. Melle van Maanen, thank you very much for your sharing knowledge and experience and your views about this. Thank you for your time, and thank you for everybody in Indonesia in the evening, your rest time, and in the Netherlands and maybe in other places also. Thank you very much. And we would like to see you again at the 1st of March with the webinar, the second series about Indonesian influence. Thank you very much. And we are going to be online for a few minutes for those who need to send a chat for certificates. Thank you. You may go if you wish. We don't make pictures because of the privacy rules in the Netherlands, that we are not allowed to publish something without your consent. So we are not going to make pictures. Thank you.